When most people think of a hacker, they picture images of clandestine figures in hoodies, creating havoc from within dimly lit basements. But as the landscape of cyber warfare evolves, so do the actors portrayed. The movie, War Games, alluded to the diversity within the hacker community, showcasing that hacking knows no boundaries. Picture this. It's 1999, a time when the internet was still finding its feet and people around the world were captivated by the wonders of space exploration. But behind the scenes, a different drama unfolds as NASA's vital systems came under attack. What began as a breach soon escalated into a full-blown siege, leaving the space agency reeling and the world questioning the future vulnerabilities of our digital infrastructure. The breach resulted in the shutdown of crucial systems for nearly 3 weeks, costing NASA thousands of dollars in repairs. What made this attack particularly notable wasn't just its impact, but the unlikely culprit behind it all. Hello and welcome to another Core podcast. I'm your host, Kelly, and I'm delighted to say that I've got Andy here joining us today on our podcast to talk all things about unveiling the illusion of security preparedness. And we've got some great stories to bring to you. Andy, for anyone that doesn't know you, could you just give me a quick background on Andy? Andy, as a child, how did you end up in cybersecurity? Was it something that you always wanted to do, or did you have other ambitions when you were younger?
I had definitely other ambitions, so it was more like an accident ending up in cyber.
Okay.
So when I touched the computer for my father the first time, I got addicted to video games. So I think like many teenagers and my kids as well. So I feel the pain from parents. And later I started as a system programmer in a bank. So doing mainframe stuff, core banking. I would say I never chose to do security. It just came to me. There were no real security standards at that time.
Yeah.
And the bank was looking for volunteers doing security. And my colleagues stepped back and I thought, oh, this sounds really great. So I stepped forward. And since then, I'm in security. So it's now over 24 years. So quite a long time.
24 years. And you've had an incredible career. So you've worked in extensive different roles, I believe, in multiple organizations as a CISO, and you're now working as an advisor. Could you give me a little bit of background into that and how you've got from a CISO to being an advisor and what that looks like?
Yeah, so like today I'm at Lacework, I'm a field CISO. So it's no longer operationally responsible. I'm helping our customers on their cloud security journey, because I've done most of that in the past by myself. I've witnessed attacks, so I know how it feels like being a CISO and responsible. And next to that, I'm also advisor for a couple of startups and a VC in Switzerland that is investing in fintech companies. And they are helping them doing security due diligence. So I more or less check the startups if they do the basics right. Yeah. So, and if they do, I do a recommendation from a security perspective. You should invest or not.
Okay, so you've got a fantastic background. You've been involved in a lot of different things. So today we're looking at misconceptions surrounding security preparedness. To shed a bit of light on the critical issue, Andy, of this, could you just kind of bring us up on why things happened and the NASA cyber attack and what that looked like and why that's quite a good story to start with? I know it's 1999, but why is that still relevant today, and what can we learn from that experience?
It's actually the time when I started in security.
Really?
So that's very relevant. No, but I still remember that. At that time, there were already like professional nation state hackers, but it was the beginning of that. We had script kiddies out there. And NASA was hacked in 1999 by a teenager. He was 15 years old at that time. And he did that mostly for fun. So at that time, hacking was like something for fun for teenagers. I might have played around with that as well a little bit. So hacking was like competing with your friends. I'm able to get in. So like how teenagers do stupid things. Yeah. But he was very talented. So he got in by finding a vulnerability in the NASA network. He got in, installed a backdoor, got access to proprietary code and software that could operate the ISS. So really, that's massive. So he had access to a lot of systems, read a lot of emails, or had access to emails, and NASA didn't detect anything. So he informed NASA that he's the cool little teenager guy who hacked NASA. So it was not NASA's defense systems.
He didn't play it cool. He made sure they knew. Okay.
Yeah.
Another
so
teenager.
So how teenagers are. It's a bit stupid.
Yeah.
So and NASA had to shut down the whole network for, I think, days or weeks. So it had a huge
from my
damage
notes and from my research, apparently 3 weeks. The breach took for them, and it costed NASA thousands of dollars in repair. So yeah, he did some damage for a teenager.
Yeah, and there had been a couple of those attacks at that time. So where teenagers started, also the Chaos Computer Club, they were founded earlier, but they started. There were also in the US a couple of hacking groups that started, hacking telco networks and so on. So at that time, the shift began that you need security, because in 1999 there were no security standards or no real security standards out there. So companies did not really look at good security or protect their environment. So everything started from there, I would say, from my perspective. And if we fast forward to today, if you imagine that a 15-year-old teenager could do that, you don't want to think about what an army of professional hackers from nations could do to your network. So everything has changed since then. That's why it's a very interesting story and how it started.
And it is also just a real good reminder that how sophisticated NASA thought it was at the time. There are still holes in our infrastructure. There are still ways to get in. And like you said, a teenager could get in that time. I know it's advanced a lot more since 1999, but then the hacker has advanced of us also. So it's gone pretty hand in hand in that over time. So from your perspective, going on to on the cloud security posture, what is the purpose of this, and how can we now use the cloud and have a strong posture, and how is that really giving us an advantage by adopting it?
So if you look at those old environments that have been on-prem, they usually were not really standardized. So every system looked differently. And as there was that concept of, I'm isolated from the bad world out there. So I have my on-prem environment, I'm isolated. But as an attacker, you only had to find one little hole to get in, and then you had open doors. Those on-prem networks usually were not really well protected. I remember that we had back in that days, a patching cycle every 6 months. So we patched every 6 months. Today on our computers, we do that daily or even quicker. Yeah. So if you move to the cloud, everything becomes very standardized. So you don't patch every 6 months. You have a standard operating system. The network is operated by the hyperscaler, so AWS, Google, or Microsoft, and they do that in a very standardized way. So everything is standardized. So the basics are usually already there. So having patching in place and so on. On top of that, a new problem starts to appear because you're open to the internet. Right. So you are immediately in the internet. So if you imagine there was that James out there in 1999, he had to look for the NASA network. Now, as soon as you start a server in the cloud or service, it's visible for the whole world. So everyone is trying to get in already. So you have to be quicker in everything what you do. That's why that posture is so important. As a defender, you have to close every hole in there. As an attacker, you only have to find one. Yeah. So you already have that huge disadvantage. Yeah. So before you move to the cloud, you should have a plan. That's how I want to close those holes that I know of. And you can only do those.
You just put that,
those,
though, that you know of. I mean, I've not been in the industry as long as you have, and obviously from a marketing perspective, but the conversation that continually comes up is visibility. You only know what you know. So that, like you highlighted there, you can protect what you know about, but we all know that there's leaks or ways or paths in, or people doing things completely accidentally that could make a hole, right? So the visibility, I imagine, is a big piece that people need to be considered part of the plan.
Yes. So you have to have some kind of continuous visibility already for everything that you know. So which are my systems that are unpatched? Where are my, let's say, risks? Where are my misconfigurations? To fix those as quick as possible. So you need to do that and have some kind of continuous view on that. This has changed if we look at back in on-prem environments. This was also important, but not as important as today.
Okay.
So today you really have to do that. Otherwise, if you have one hole open, you just have to wait. It will be some attacker will get in. So it's just a matter of time, and it can be really quick.
Just to throw in some stats, we're saying that 15% of breaches are due to misconfiguration. And I believe, depending on when people are listening to this podcast, the McDonald's, Greggs, Sainsbury's recent where we couldn't use our cards and transactions, they've put that down to misconfiguration. So we can see that it's massively prevalent, and it impacts some of the biggest businesses and brands that we work with today. I mean, I think a few people in work moaned that they couldn't buy their McDonald's that day, so or their Greggs sausage rolls. So that is, we can see that's still really, really prevalent in what's going on. So in your opinion, in your background, obviously, we can see that most people are either going to the cloud or have a, on-prem and cloud hybrid kind of look to that. How do you think that people can enhance their security posture and mitigate as much risk as possible of going to cyber attack? Because some people listening to this podcast will be on various levels of the journey. Some may be there, some may be considering it, some might be in between. So from your experience, so if someone's going to the cloud, how are they mitigating risk and doing as much as they can to not be breached?
So I would always start with doing everything as code. So that's the first thing. That you don't do maintenance and admin work in your runtime environment. You do that in code, and then you redeploy. So it's like changing your behavior from an IT perspective. The old IT world, you did everything in runtime. Today's world, you do everything in code. And with that shift, you get some new ways how to do security. Doing security early in the code is better than later in runtime. That's the first concept that you should apply. The second is I work for Lacework, so a CNAP vendor. CNAP, like meaning cloud security vendor. But I would always try to get some third-party tooling in place for a good reason. So if you could already start with the native tooling from the hyperscalers, that's working as well. But if we look back, there was always that principle of segregation of duties in security. So you had, usually in larger enterprises, you didn't have just one vendor for example, for firewalls. You had two vendors. So in case one is breached, you have the other one.
You have a backup.
That principle is most often forgotten today. And last year, Microsoft got hacked, as an example. They have their own tooling. They are one of the largest security vendors on the planet. But their tooling more or less failed. So they had to be informed by customers. It's a bit like that NASA story. So where the teenager had to inform NASA that they got hacked. In this case, it was a customer from the US government informing Microsoft that they have been breached. And there is a good CISO report out there. But I would always try to focus on not just playing one card. So if you go with a hyperscaler, if you move to the cloud, do everything as code, and try to onboard a third-party security tool that helps you getting the basics right. So that's like the second thing, getting all the basics right. Vulnerability, misconfigurations, fix all those parts. And the third is the most important one is doing more for detection, because it's not enough to do misconfigurations. You have to do way more.
Okay. And what would you say is a best practice then for detection?
So you should assume that there are many Jameses out there that will succeed. Because
and I think that you just basically have to be prepared. It's kind of
you
that
have to
they
be
are going to
prepared
get
that
in,
you're a
aren't
hack.
they?
So it's like if you have your house. So I have 2 kids. So when they were babies, you really get super paranoid. So you want to have your everything secured. So you want them to survive more or less. And you close the doors, close the windows and everything, but you also have like a fire sensor in your apartment, usually in your house, because whatever you do, the more you clean up, it still a fire might break out, and only the sensor can detect that. That's why that doesn't mean you shouldn't clean up, but you should have the sensor as well in case someone really gets in. And there you have to think about, where do I want to have those detections in place? So with a fire, it's very simple. You put the fire sensor in your room. If it's about your crown jewels of your company, you have to think about, where is the best place to put sensors in place to detect attacks. So there are several approaches, and every vendor will tell you that they have the best, of course. But still, you should focus on detection, because the attackers are not just looking for open holes. They are also able to create holes that you are unaware of. And that's why you need those detection capabilities.
Going back to your point 2 and point 1. Point 1, you're mentioning is a lot more coding now and kind of security by design. How has that evolved recruitment and getting people into those roles? Because obviously cloud is quite new. Do you feel that there is a gap in having the right people to take on those jobs? And do you think that's having an impact? Because obviously I think everyone would love to do security by design, but a lot of people I speak to, which kind of rolls onto my second question, is that resources are hard, recruitment is genuinely hard, and also you're mentioning that we should have 2 tools in case one goes down. I'm sure you've been on a CISO board meeting requesting more budget to then say, oh, I want budget for 2 of the tools that technically do the same thing. Like so the kind of a few questions there. How are we with the recruitment, and do you still kind of believe in the trends and the fact that there is not enough people joining the industry, and also is the cloud's a new phenomenon, so it could be harder to hide? And secondly, if anyone is thinking, it's a hard enough time me getting them to buy me 1 product, how have you pitched 2? How have you tackled those?
So the question with the talent, it's a talent shortage more or less. So if we look at the cybersecurity market from a recruiting market, we don't have enough talents out there, and sometimes we have the wrong ones. So if you move from on-prem in the cloud, the on-prem security engineer might be very network centric, might have network knowledge, might have CM knowledge, so like IDS knowledge, firewall knowledge, whereas the cloud security engineer might be more Terraform, CNAP, CSPM. So you have completely different tooling. Everything changes. So as companies, I would advise them to think about upskilling them, because not everyone is able to make that jump to the cloud. The second is new security engineers that work in the cloud usually have to have some coding skills, some basic skills. You didn't have to do that in the past. Now you have to do that. So the profile of a security engineer has evolved and has changed. And this doesn't help, because that makes the talent shortage even worse. That's why I believe you need good tooling that helps you bridging
Automate
that
it.
gap that you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
So you have to think about as an outcome. I want to protect my business from anything bad happening. But if something bad is happening, how many people do I need to overcome that? So is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 15? And then you have to look how many, for example, if you have a security operations center, how many alerts are they able to read daily? Is that even possible to read like 1,000 alerts? And then you can go back to tooling questions. What are the right technologies that I need so that my workforce that I have can work with that? Because most likely you can't, even if you get the budget to hire more people, you might not find them on the market. That's, I think, really a critical problem. So you need to assume that you can't get more people, but you might have to do more with the people you have.
Yeah.
And as soon as you go to the cloud, you have the time where you have on-prem and cloud with the same people. So you have that time is very critical because you have a skills gap and you might have like double the work. So it's difficult.
It's not easy. No. And you can see the evolution of why the technology, AI has been used in a lot more because of that. And we've done, just talking about, SOC and managed SOC and all that sort of thing. With the amount of SOC analysts we've had, I think 2 or 3 on here of discussing the burnout and the fatigue, and also it's pinging all day. So which is the most critical alert? Like, we're human beings, right? And you can become desensitive by it. So I completely understand. And it is evolving. I think when I read the Gartner report that they're the ones that they were most concerned about for hire in cloud, I think was the second, that there just wasn't enough people coming into it. But interestingly, if anyone's listening to the podcast, I think if you've got like a coding, bit of a gamer kind of in you, that it could be a really good outlet, because ultimately you're building the most secure game against the baddies if you think about it that way.
It is.
If you're
by the way, if you start your career in cyber, or let's say cloud security, that's one of the most demanded jobs out there. Doesn't mean that you get rich, but it might be easy to start there, and getting some coding skills helps.
Yes, definitely. So you've given the 3 kind of standardized best practice of what you would think would be a good structure to being secure in the cloud. We still know that there's 85% of breaches are from different ways, different threats, whether they're human error. So, it's not all down to misconfigurations and things like that. So even if you achieve like 100% compliance with a CSPM guidelines, it doesn't guarantee 100% security, does it? And I think you have highlighted this, that we should be prepared that someone is going to get in at some point. Would you agree on that?
Absolutely. I mean, a few weeks ago, there was this disclosure of the XZUtils vulnerability. So where most likely nation-state hacker build a backdoor within XZUtils that is like open source software used in almost every Linux system on the planet. And Linux is like the core of all cloud. So open source drives everything. And now, even if I work for a vendor, but once it was disclosed, everyone is like very hectic and providing guidance how to fix that. But there has been a long period of time where this was unknown. Right. And if something is unknown, you can be compliant. All those companies have been compliant. They were fully patched, but the vulnerability was not known. The exploit was not yet used, or maybe it was used and we just don't know it. And there are hundreds or thousands of other packages out there that might also have a backdoor in, and we just don't know it yet. So even if you're compliant, it doesn't mean anything at all. So for me, it's not like fake security. It's important to have that security as well. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have detection capabilities in place that help you identifying if someone is getting in, then you don't really have security. That's, by the way, why also regulators are changing how they require companies doing security. It's no longer just being compliant, doing CSPM. Usually they also now include things like anomaly detection, and that's a way superior way of detecting attacks. And so I see the next shift will happen in the next year or 2 years, where more and more companies focus on detection, because it's just not enough. CSPM is not enough.
You can see that, though, from, like you were saying, we were actually talking on Monday about the DORA framework and NIS2 and how that's coming in, and how there's the changing of the guidelines now. Like you said, it's not kind of just a tick box exercise. You've now got to evidence it, show how you're doing this. And when we saw this with DSPT, with the NHS, it was, with medical devices, you now had to be able to show them what ones were critical, what's running on them, that sort of thing. It wasn't just do you have a spreadsheet of all your medical devices? Like, everything's evolving as the industry does, right? I think cybersecurity, really, if you think about all industries, it's still quite new. Would you agree? Like, it's still quite an infancy of, even going back to 1999, like from NASA, that probably, it has evolved so much, and probably James at that time do it now, or do it so publicly, or probably not. I don't know. I'm sure teenagers are still hacking, but whether they would publicly tell NASA it's them, it's probably evolved quite a bit. Andy, you have lots of experience. We've touched on the NASA story. Is there any other ones that, for anyone that's maybe getting into cybersecurity, would have heard of a headline or know of a story, but wouldn't have really thought about the implications of cybersecurity? I know when I talk to friends, they don't really consider how cybersecurity would have an impact on political or a war or that sort of thing. In your experience, you said that you've seen other things going on. Have there been ever other stories that people might be fascinated that have a link to cybersecurity?
So one is NotPetya. So there is a wonderful story about NotPetya that was, it's very, for today, it's really important because it was related to Russia and Ukraine. We have a war in Ukraine happening right now, and NotPetya was a cyber attack at targeting a Ukrainian tax software manufacturer, so a small business called MeDoc, and they created a backdoor in there to wipe out every Ukrainian business. It's like a brilliant little thing. So it looked like a ransomware, but it was not. It was just wiping and destroying the companies. They did not. So the Russian hackers did not estimate the potential impact, because we are in a global world. So the internet doesn't know borders. So, for example, Maersk and others were affected by that as well, because they have havens in Ukraine and they operate there. So there was a global impact. And what many don't know is that it was very close to the death of the internet. So it was so dramatic that the whole internet, everything could have gone down with that NotPetya. So we had a lot of luck at that time, but it started very similar. Vulnerabilities, unpatched systems. If you think about NASA, that's the basics. That's why you need CSPM and things. But they also didn't have any detections in place, no plan B if you are hacked. So it's the same, you could say, blueprint that is working there. And that's a fantastic story. Also with some putting some bad light on insurances, because there were companies being insured against cyber attacks. But this is like, it was considered, this is like war. This is not like a cyber attack. So it was out of insurance. And there was a lawsuit for a couple of companies going over 7 or 8 years, and was settled, I think, last year.
Wow.
so it's a time frame of 10 years that companies were trying to get money from insurances. And this is like a fantastic blueprint for a cyber attack. And almost every other attack that happened later are very similar. So NotPetya is a wonderful story. SolarWinds is a very good story. That's a supply chain attack. So I would look at SolarWinds, NotPetya, and go back to the NASA hack and look how this looked like and evolved over time.
But the foundations are still the same, like you said. They found a way in and no one was able to detect them. So even talking about something in 1999, it might not seem relevant to now. It has so much relevance because same kind of mistakes are being made. And I think, like you said, it's continuously evolving. Like we're moving to the cloud, and probably a few years ago people thought, oh, we'll just put a firewall up so that we're safe now when people punch through that. So I think the hackers going with us all the time. Would you believe, I mean, do you agree with that? Like it's quite a dynamic landscape and it's continuously evolving. Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have feels like an armed race all the time. So in the past, it was like firewalls and network packages. Today, it's more identities. So almost most of these successful attacks happen through compromised identities, compromised credentials. That's how most attackers are successful. And there, humans are the number one target. So, and if we think forward, so for the next years, AI or Gen AI and deepfake will again target us as humans, and we will need those technologies to protect us on the other side. So it continues to evolve. I remember the first CFO scams that I've seen where a colleague of mine spent, I don't know, $200 for gift cards for a fake CEO or CFO. Freaked out. Today, this is happening with deepfake calls already. So you see that this is changing, but somehow it's still targeting us as humans to scam us, to make us do something. And then if you have the identity, if you have achieved that, from there, then the attacks haven't changed that much because they are still successful. Yeah. And honestly, hackers could create zero-day exploits. It's difficult and expensive, but maybe it's easier to just target us as humans. It's still the easiest way to just trick people doing something. It's cheaper.
And do you think it's a default because as human beings we default trust, or do you think that's gonna change? Because like I think definitely my human nature is to trust someone until. Like otherwise, like I don't normally pick up a phone call and go, oh, is that AI? Is that really someone's voice? I mean, definitely since I've been in the industry, that's changed a lot more. Like I get an email through and go, that doesn't look legit, or I get a text message that doesn't look quite right. Like, or my trust has definitely changed, but that's obviously been through training and experience and speaking to yourself and other people on the podcast. So, do you think? As a nation, as human race, it's going to change, that we are going to double take when we get phone calls? Or do you think hopefully the technology is going to advance enough that we as humans don't have to change ourselves by nature? I'm just wondering, by nature, would we have to change as the hacks evolve?
I think it's one of the good things about us as humans is that we feel if something is wrong or not.
Right.
So I remember when I was first time with my wife, when we went to Miami, we were driving into the wrong direction, some really shady neighborhood, and we just felt, oh, it doesn't feel good.
You're right.
We have that sense of that. If we are on that fast-paced internet and more disconnected, we somehow lose that sense. But I believe that usually we feel it a little bit. So sometimes I've also clicked on email links and other things where there was that feeling. So, oh, I think I did something wrong. But it's shorter and more difficult to sense that. But we still have that. So I believe that we as humans can always trust our sensors that we have, even if it's difficult, but it's like our detection sensors that we have around there.
Yeah.
And the second is that the technology will help us. So I wouldn't drive my car without a seatbelt and airbag anymore. So I think we have to embed those defensive technologies in such a way that they are not surrounding us. They may not give us a feeling of they are blocking us or slowing us down. So the technology sometimes feels too complicated for end users, so they skip.
Yes. Yeah.
If we find a way to have technology and embed it in our daily life, plus our sensors that we have, then I think we are fine. Something that will always work is if you meet in person, it will be difficult to trick someone. So maybe it increases the value of physical meetings and face-to-face meetings. I hope so.
Human connection. No, I like that. I think, with the involvement, with the metaverse and stuff like that, and I still really do hope that these things, real conversations happen, that you meet. I mean, we joked the other day that ultimately they probably have enough of my voice now through the podcast that at some point, do I even need to host it? Will someone run it? But it removes, doesn't that, connection and meeting you and that side of things, and meetings, decisions. And also, if normally default, if the FD asks you to do something, he would come to your desk. He wouldn't send it by email or phone you. If something gets requested, they would normally ask you in person. I think it's our behaviour, isn't it? So that the hacker can't get around that. If Dave in accounts always comes to you on a Friday with these requests and says, I'm going to send it to you by email later, a hacker won't know that bit. They might work out that it sends the email on a Monday, but he doesn't know that Dave sits down with Jane on the Friday and goes through it. If Dave didn't sit down with Jane, then she's going to know something's up. So, or she'd probably go back, wouldn't she, going, oh, we didn't go through this on Friday. Can you explain why? It's kind of, I like that. I think you're saying that we need to have more human connection to get around it. And I think that's a much nicer place to be than maybe in us default always thinking that an email's suspicious or gosh, how uncreative would that be? Every time you got an email through for someone's party or an event or a link and you never opened anything, it'd be quite a sad place to be, wouldn't it?
Right. So I'm an optimistic person. So I believe that there are these bad things about technology, but there are so many good things about technology. Where even with deep fake, you can do good things. So you can create I don't know. I would think about seeing. Okay, I don't want to have a conversation with my mother anymore, but because she already died a couple of years ago. But maybe this would be a way to create some kind of virtual avatar for those who have issues with letting loose or something. So maybe there are good ways to use new technologies, and it's just pushing us forward. Every time it's pushing us forward. Even COVID had some good things. So I can order my food at home all the time. It arrives. So everyone is using Zoom or other things, so I can work from home. So there are so many good things coming out of that. And we have to stick to the positive outcomes, not to the negative ones. And
that's why I really enjoy being in this industry, because I think everyone involved in it comes from that mindset, that positive mindset. Because if you did get bogged down by the recruitment or the attacks, or you would get stuck and you'd never move. But everyone that I speak to on this podcast sees a positive way through it, whether that's through technology or people, and I think that's what's incredibly inspiring about it. If someone was listening to the podcast, Andy, why would you encourage them to join cybersecurity if they're not, or thinking of a career change, or maybe they're 16-year-old right now that's loving games and has just stumbled upon this? Why would you encourage someone to join us in cybersecurity?
For me, it's you never stop learning. It's really, everything is going so quickly with all the technology that is advancing over time. So it never gets boring. You just don't learn in university. I made my, I don't know, bachelor, master's and whatever. And then that's it. You always have to keep up. And that's a good feeling. It's never getting boring. And then there are like so many areas where you can start in cybersecurity and doing your career. You can be a specialist. You can write security software. You can work for a vendor trying to defend things. You can work as a professional hacker, helping hacking into companies and finding flaws. So there are plenty of things. So the CISO, so the ultimate leader, might not be the goal that you have, where you are more like a manager. But there are so many different roles in there that are super interesting. And it will be always one of the most demanded jobs. So if you have 10,000 employees, you might have 1,000 developers, but you might only have 50 security people in the company. You are always one of the few in there, and you will always be demanded, whatever you do.
And it definitely stretches you. I think, like you said, like it's always evolving. I don't think I've ever come in and there's not been some new acronym or some new technology or some new thing. Like you said, you are continuously learning. And I think that's what I like about it. It's incredibly fast paced. Even though I sit on the marketing side of things, like even for us, it's language or what's happening, you're continuously learning. So I think whatever area you go into cyber, like you said, it's a fantastic journey to be in. To loop all the way back round and what we've been talking about. So we have said that the CSPMS does play a vital role, but it is only one piece of the puzzle. If someone has kind of used that as their main pillar, what other things would you recommend them having in their tool stack to make sure that, like you said, they are ready for a defense? Is it making sure that they are listening to podcasts? Is it make sure that they are trialing new tech? Is it maybe taking a framework and using that? What other guidance would you give, especially if someone's maybe newly into a CISO role?
So CSPM is a good start, like we discussed. So you should like have that checkbox done. I would always try to listen to a couple of podcasts out there that cover cloud security. There are some good ones, like this one.
Oh, well, Lacework does a very good one. Like ours isn't particularly but Lacework has a very good podcast.
Yes. We also have a cloud security podcast. There are others out there as well. So personally, I listen to the Google Cloud Security podcast as well. I really like that one too. It's more technical, so more a deep dive, but it's also good. Besides that, CSPM is the start. I would then look at KIEM, so looking at your identities. So CSPM for the cloud configuration, then the identities. It's more like CSPM for identities, honestly. So it's still in that same space. And then I would move forward to workload protection. CWPP sometimes, or CWP, depending on which acronym is used, but it's all around your runtime detection capabilities. So runtime and detection is the key area that I would always focus on very early. So not just on the let's say proactive part, but really getting into the reactive part. So, and there are vendors out there that do that. Lacework is one of them, of course, but there are also others. So thinking about not just proactive, but also the reactive part one.
And just to loop back on, I don't think we quite covered the question, but you mentioned that potentially you might need 2 tools to do the same job. We're seeing a lot of reports coming up that people are struggling. They're actually removing some tech. They don't have as much budgets. For your experience then going to the board, which I'm guessing you had similar conversations, how would you suggest someone pitches potentially getting 2 products to do the same job, and how do you pitch that?
So I would say at least have a hyperscaler, like let's assume AWS. You go to your board and say, we are with AWS, and then you pick a security tool, not AWS. or not
Right.
Microsoft or not Azure. Because otherwise you really fully rely on one vendor. So one infrastructure, one vendor, and this can be really tricky if something happens at that hyperscaler side.
Yeah.
So I would say it would be best to also have like 2 security tools in place. This is more than for really large organizations that will have something like that in place. They might use something else for identities than the CNAP tooling, as an example. But if you move to the cloud, I would not. You could start with the native tooling from the hyperscalers, but I would go with a third-party vendor.
Okay. And when you're looking at vendors and when you were researching, obviously you're an advocate for Laceworks. How would you recommend someone starts looking for a technology partner? What's your kind of best practice with that? Because I appreciate coming from marketing, there's a lot of strap lines. A lot of people say they do certain things, but it might be not the right fit for your environment. Or so how would you recommend someone when they're shopping around to make sure that they're kind of making the right fit for them?
I would test it out. I did the same in the past with EDR vendors. So before cloud security, I just tested them out. I tried to think in my organization. I ran like POVs or POCs, however you name them. But I reached out to a couple of vendors from my side. Some reached out to me. This happens all the time. But then I just made a selection. If it's about cloud security, then I picked like 4 different vendors or 5 different vendors, made my first assessment more on a paper base, and then I went to a, let's say, trial POV POC with 3 vendors and tried it out. And then again, you have those sensors. So usually you already feel very early which is the right tool for you. Then everything, you many work with some kind of scoring system in their sheet, and they do that. But usually you already decide early. You feel if it's the right thing or not. So I always recommend to listen to those feelings. Also, because on the other side, there are people. You need to connect to those people, because the company you choose, that's like the company protecting you. That's part of yourself. This is like part of your home, part of your crown jewels and everything. So you have to create that trust between them. And if you feel these are people I don't want to trust, or even if the technology looks good, I don't like the people, then that's not a fit. So I would always recommend to listen to that.
Yeah, because you could have the best tool, but if the people that are deploying it or looking after you, or the customer service doesn't align to you, then it can have an impact. It just shows how important. And like you say, it goes back to that human element. You can buy as many tech, but like there is always a person on the other side helping you on the end of the call and stuff, and you've got to have that rapport and relationship with them. Which again is why I think I like cybersecurity. It's such an
it is.
It's technology, but it's got such a human element to it. Thank you, Andy, so much for your time and taking out an hour to spend and talk to me. Is there any closing remarks before we close the show? Or also, how can someone connect with you if they wanted to speak to you more around what you do and also especially all your experience in the cloud?
So if you want to connect with me, best via LinkedIn. So I sadly don't have the time to use Twitter. Oh, it's no longer Twitter, but maybe it's a good thing that I don't have to use it anymore. But so it's just LinkedIn. If you look for Andy Schneider and Lacework, then you will definitely find me, and happy to have a conversation there. I'm attending many conferences, so I'm at all the AWS summits around Europe usually, and other events that we do with partners. So if someone attends that, it would be fantastic to meet in person actually.
Yes,
and
I believe
have a
you're
coffee
coming to
or
the
tea.
you're here at the castle on the 20th of June,
Yes.
so I'll get to meet you in person. So that will be nice. So
Yeah,
extend the from
absolutely.
on remotely. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time. I do hope that we can have you on again because I feel like I've just lifted the lid of conversations that we can have with you. I think you've got a breadth of experience. So thank you so much for your time again, and I look forward to seeing you really soon. So today's episode was really interesting because I think using an actual attack that's happened in 1999, although I guess old, but against NASA, it still has relevance today. Speaking to Andy, he's talking about your cloud security posture management, and that's kind of more a foundation, if not kind of like the ingredients to the cake, but it's not everything, and there are still ways to get into your cloud. And he gives you 3 really good guides and tips of what to do, also ways to look into technology, and also not just to rely, maybe have a plan B, and also, as it gets discussed everywhere, he still highlights that it's really important to think security first with your coding and what things come to the cloud. So it's really fascinating. What's also really nice is that Andy, although attacks are evolving and it looks like the baddies are evolving and it's not James in a hoodie trying to get into NASA, he sees the good in it and the human connection and why cybersecurity is still a fascinating industry to be part of.